để giao thông với Trung Quốc, nên liệt truyện của cả ba nước mới được chép trong sách Hán Thư của Phạm Diệp hay sách Đường Thư của Tống Kỳ. Nhưng trong các trường hợp ấy, những việc của Trung Quốc thì được ghi chép tỉ mỉ, việc của nước ngoài thì chỉ được họ chép sơ sài, không thể đem tất cả các sự thật của ba nước chúng ta chép vào đó được. Hơn nữa, sách cổ ký có văn từ thô lỗ, cộc cằn. Sử tích thì thiếu, không thể hiện hết và không khuyên răn được cái thiện, điều ác của nhà vua, lòng trung thành và lòng tà niệm của các quan, mối an nguy của xã tắc và việc trị loạn trong nhân dân. Giờ đây, đúng lúc có được nhân tài uyên bác cùng viết nên lịch sử một nhà, truyền cho hậu thế, sáng tựa nhật nguyệt muôn đời. (2018년부터) 이제 축구가 이제 유명해져가지고 많은 사람이 한국에 대한 관심을 가지게 됐죠. 또 요새 이제 한국어를 하는 사람이 많다 보니까 이제 점점 한국어 능력이 많이 좋아지거든요. 그래서 번역가 분들도 번역 능력도 많이 좋아져가지고 번역 저서도 독자를 많이 끕니다. 물론 한국 문화와 베트남 문화는 사람들이 공통점이 많다고 이야기했는데도 분명히 거기에 차이점이 있습니다. 예를 들어서 같은 유교 문화인데도 받아들이는 것은 다르기 때문에 번역가들이 그런 차이점을 모르면 번역할 때는 어렵고 오해할 수도 있거든요. 오해할 수도 있어서 그런 부분이 좀 신경 써야 하지 않은가. 그리고 한국어와 베트남어의 문법상으로 봤을 때 거꾸로 되어 있습니다. 그래서 그런 부분도 신경 써야 하고, 그리고 한국어의 특징은 수식 부분이 있는데 그 수식 부분을 주어의 수식 부분인지 또는 목적어의 수식 부분인지를 잘 구별해서 해야 하는 것 같습니다. 근데 작품에서 인간이 겪는 그런 일들을 다루거나 혹은 사람이 아름답게 살아가는 권장들을 하는 작품들인 것 같습니다. 제가 여태까지 한국 문학을 많이 번역했는데요. 제 전공은 아까 말씀드렸지만은 고전 문학이다 보니까 공부하고 이제 하다 보면은 이제 역사랑 관련성이 있어가지고 많이 읽게 되고요. 그래서 문학을 하면서 역사도 보니까 너무 재미있는 거예요. 그래서 이제 하나의 꿈이 뭐가 있냐면은 기회가 되면 한국 역사 자료들을 각 시기별로 한국 고대사부터 현대사까지 번역하고 싶습니다. 네.
In our headlines on this Wednesday, June 25th, here in South Korea, the fragile truce between Israel and Iran is in place after a sharp rebuke from the U.S. leader in response to allegations of violations. Meanwhile, today, June 25th, South Korea marks 75 years since the start of the war here on the Korean peninsula that lasted for 3 years. And the confirmation hearing for Prime Minister nominee Kim Min-seok opens for a second day on this Wednesday, with lawmakers poles apart. We start with a stern warning from U.S. President Donald Trump directed at Israel and Iran amid allegations of violations of the ceasefire he had earlier declared. Our Jyang starts us off.
The 12-day war between Israel and Iran ended on Wednesday following the end of a 24-hour phased ceasefire announced by U.S. President Donald Trump, though both sides traded minor attacks during the truce. President Trump gave a strong warning to both Israel and Iran, accusing them of violating the ceasefire. According to the Associated Press, Trump on Tuesday expressed frustration with Israel for retaliating against Iran and called Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, urging him to stop the attacks.
Israel, as soon as we made the deal, they came out and they dropped a load of bombs, the likes of which I've never seen before. The biggest load that we've seen. I'm not happy with Israel.
Trump also emphasized that he does not want to see regime change in Iran, which he said would lead to chaos.
No, I don't want it. I'd like to see everything calm down as quickly as possible. Regime change takes chaos, and ideally we don't want to see so much chaos.
This comes as tensions flared again just hours after the ceasefire between Israel and Iran took effect on Tuesday. Israel accused Iran of violating the ceasefire with missile launches, while Iran denied the claims. Israel and Iran both claimed victory in the recent conflict. Israel said it had removed two major threats, Iran's nuclear weapons and ballistic missiles.
Dear citizens of Israel, during the 12 days of the Operation Rising Lion, we achieved a historic victory, and this victory will stand for generations.
Israeli Defense Minister Israel Katz said on social media that Israel will respect the ceasefire as long as the other side does. The military chief of staff Eyal Zamir said that Israel's military is shifting its focus back to Gaza. Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian said Tehran would only hit Israel if it violates the ceasefire deal. He also expressed his country's readiness to resolve disputes with the U.S. within an international framework. Meanwhile, Trump's Special Middle East Envoy Steve Witkoff said the U.S. and Iran are engaged in both direct talks and discussions through intermediaries about returning to negotiations on Iran's nuclear program following Israeli and U.S. strikes on Iran's nuclear facilities. In an interview with Fox News, Witkoff added that the conversations are promising. Jyang, Arirang News.
The Trump administration remains committed to complete denuclearization of North Korea. The remark was made by U.S. State Department spokesperson Tammy Bruce on Tuesday during a press briefing when asked about the lesson for North Korea to be learned from the Pentagon strikes against Iranian nuclear facilities this past weekend. She also claimed that if dialogue fails with North Korea, her department was open to speculating different scenarios. Meanwhile, in the Netherlands, leaders of NATO, including U.S. President Donald Trump, are gathered for their annual security talks there this week, amid concerns raised by a recent remark by Mr. Trump regarding his commitment to the alliance's mutual defense clause. Our Lee Jae explains.
U.S. President Donald Trump arrived at The Hague on Tuesday and began his official activities for the North Atlantic Treaty Organization Summit. Leaders and officials from 32 countries, including President Trump, are scheduled to hold a plenary session of the North Atlantic Council on Wednesday local time, with a press conference scheduled for later that afternoon. The joint statement of this year's summit is expected to include an agreement that all member countries will eventually spend 5% of their GDP on defense, something the U.S. leader has been pushing for. Meanwhile, NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte said on Tuesday that he has no doubt that the U.S. is committed to NATO's Article 5 Mutual Defense Clause. The comment came as Trump raised renewed doubts about his willingness to protect U.S. allies. When asked by a reporter on his way to The Hague whether he's still committed to Article 5, which states that an armed attack against one or more of its members would be considered an attack against all NATO member states, he gave a rather ambiguous answer.
It depends on your definition. There's numerous definitions of Article 5. You know that, right? But I'm committed to being their friends. You know, I've become friends with many of those leaders, and I'm committed to helping them.
Trump has, however, decided not to attend a special meeting with the Indo-Pacific 4 or IP4 countries, including South Korea. According to NATO officials, the U.S.-NATO IP4 meeting scheduled for Wednesday has been changed to a NATO IP4 format. One official said Trump's non-participation was due to scheduling issues. Meanwhile, with a major focus on NATO's defense spending this year, UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer has pledged to meet the target of 5% of the UK's GDP by 2035. All NATO member countries are also expected to agree to spending 3.5% on core defense issues and the remaining 1.5% on other defense-related areas, such as resilience and security. Lee Jae, Arirang News.
Here on the local front, President Lee Jae Myung believes the most solid form of security was possible by making peace. Now, remarks to this end were shared on his social media platform to mark a solemn anniversary today, that is June 25th, which is the day that war broke out on the Korean Peninsula. While honoring the selfless sacrifices of all those involved, he also pledged better compensation for the country's war veterans in light of their extraordinary services. Adding that security is key for the economy, the president also made note of South Korea's rise from ruins to becoming an economic powerhouse. Now, as I just mentioned, 75 years ago today, the Korean Peninsula broke out into war. And in light of this solemn occasion, our defense correspondent Jyang met up with a photographer who has spent over a decade taking pictures of Korean War veterans to better share their stories.
An American war veteran with a Korean flag next to him. He's a veteran of the Korean War, one of 1,950,000 soldiers from 22 countries who fought for freedom on the Korean Peninsula. Some call it the forgotten war, but with the belief that the war and veterans' memories should not fade away, photographer Rami has been documenting Korean War veterans under an initiative named Project Soldier. Since he started in 2013, Rami has met more than 2,500 Korean War veterans, recording their stories.
지금까지 2,500여 명의 참전 용사분들이 인터뷰하셨는데 특히 인상 깊었던 인터뷰가 있었나요?
All the interviews were meaningful, but Colonel William Weber stood out. When veterans see their photos that make them feel like real heroes, they often tear up and ask about the price of the frame. I usually say, I'm just repaying a small debt. But Colonel Weber told me I was wrong, that as a professional soldier, he simply did his duty, and Koreans owe them nothing.
Photographer Rami's journey to document the veterans is not just to leave their stories behind. It is to let people know the value of freedom, and that freedom is not free. Sometimes military items were used in the photos to show that.
The helmet is more than just equipment. It has a symbolic meaning of protecting peace and freedom. Each veteran wrote their name, military unit, and service time on the helmet before taking the photo, showing the lasting symbol of the freedom they helped defend.
For freedom to truly endure, the sacrifices of veterans must be remembered, a message that resonates even with soldiers currently serving in Korea. Humbled, one said he was moved by how the photos captured the deep sincerity of senior veterans' commitment to freedom.
Even for me, who's currently still serving, it has inspired me to make sure I do as good as I can every day in support of the ROC, U.S. Alliance, and UNC right now. And then I'm really hopeful that our younger generation can come and see the why life is so great here in Korea.
The photographer now aims to go beyond documenting war veterans to share the stories of those who protect our freedom today.
이분들 다음에도 자유와 나라를 지켰던 수많은 사람들이 있었거든요. 주한미군 베테랑부터 경찰, 소방관. 앞으로는 이분들과 마찬가지로 자유를 지키는 수호자들, Guardians of Freedom, 이런 사람들의 얘기를 더 얘기할 예정입니다.
김보경, Arirang News.
Indeed, as they say, a picture is worth 1,000 words, but for some family members of our fallen heroes, putting a face to the name father is an indescribable experience. My colleague An Sung-jin files this report.
Song Young-hwan. He was only 26 years old when he died on the battlefield during the Korean War. His daughter Song Jae-suk was only 3 years old. She would go to the National Cemetery to remember him, but for her whole life, she knew little about her father and was even unable to picture how he looked.
사실 3살 때 돌아가셨는데 아버지에 대한 추억이 있었겠어요? 그래서 저를 할머니가 키우셨거든요. 그래서 할머니가 늘 하는 얘기가 너 3살 때 어려서 이제 아버지가 늘 안고 다니면서 제수 빵구 하면서 안고 다니셨대요. 그게 문득 생각나더라고요. 그래서
But after more than 70 years, she was able to see his face. While searching for an uncle who was also a soldier and had gone missing during the war, she had submitted a DNA sample. Surprisingly, she heard back from the Defense Ministry's excavation and identification team that they had matched her sample and her father's remains had been discovered.
감사함도 느끼고. 근데 또 그날 어버이날 행사 가가지고 그분을 뵈니까 아, 이렇게 기적이 있구나. 정말 그 눈물도 나고 마음도 애리고 저도 정말 이렇게 모시게 된 걸 너무 감사드리고 내가 부모님들한테 보은이라고 그럴까? 이런 걸 할 수 있는 게 이런 거 아닌가.
Song was able to receive a restored version of her father's picture through the joint efforts of the National Remains Recovery Team and the National Forensic Service, making it the first completed case of face restoration from remains from the Korean War. Using a CT scanner and 3D modeling software, the National Forensic Service reconstructs the structure of the subject's face, layering on muscles, skin, and shaping the eyes, nose, and mouth.
I had the privilege of taking part in a project that brings forgotten war heroes back to life to honor them. It gave me a deep sense of responsibility. And to help restore the image of who he was in life, we added the combat helmet and uniform that he would have worn at the time of his death.
The goal was to recreate not just a likeness, but a presence. This year marks the 75th anniversary of the Korean War, and there are still so many like Song Young-hwan that remain missing or unidentified. For many families of war veterans, it's the pain of not knowing that never fades. And through efforts like these, the return of these soldiers can become more than a historical footnote. An Sung-jin, Arirang News.
The confirmation hearing for Prime Minister nominee Kim Min-seok opened for a second day early on this Wednesday, and rival lawmakers remained poles apart over his qualifications. Correspondent Moon Hae-ryun has more.
The confirmation hearing for Prime Minister nominee Kim Min-seok entered its second day on Wednesday, with the ruling and opposition parties continuing to clash. Even before the main questioning session began, the ruling Democratic Party and the main opposition People Power Party were once again at odds over the submission of documents from Kim, following on from yesterday's heated debate centered around the nominee's personal wealth and finances. The PPP said that not a single document had been submitted by Kim, while the DP defended him, arguing that he had followed the precedent set by previous nominees.
We haven't received any additional documents. That's why people are calling him a documentless prime minister.
During the confirmation hearing for former Prime Minister Han Duck-soo, he also refused to submit certain documents, like the details and balances of his savings accounts.
Kim responded by saying that he has disclosed everything that needs to be disclosed. The hearing also saw Kim remarking on what he believes to be the core responsibility of the government.
There are lots of important things when it comes to running a country, but in the end, it's about keeping people safe and making sure they can live their lives without constant worry. I think one reason South Korea stands out as a meaningful travel destination for people from other countries is because we don't have guns, and it's safe here.
Kim also addressed President Lee Jae Myung's campaign pledges such as a shorter work week of 4.5 days and raising the retirement age. He acknowledged that there are many questions that need to be asked for such pledges to be implemented, and he would consider commissioning an in-depth study by a think tank. He added that policy should be crafted with care and with close attention to potential effects. As the hearing concludes today, the two parties will consider whether to adopt the review report and on Kim's eligibility for the post. While the president cannot appoint a prime minister without the National Assembly's consent, the Democratic Party's majority in parliament means it can still push through with appointing Kim, even without the backing of the People Power Party. Moon Hae-ryun, Arirang News.
President Lee Jae Myung held a town hall forum in the city of Gwangju today to address a host of regional matters. Our top office correspondent Song Yoo-jin reports.
Communicating with the public has been one of the key priorities for South Korean President Lee Jae Myung. As part of such efforts, he held a town hall meeting in the southwestern city of Gwangju on Wednesday. The first half of the meeting centered on the long-stalled relocation of the Gwangju Air Base. While the city seeks to move both the military air base and its civilian airport to Muan International Airport in the surrounding Jeollanam-do province, the plan has faced strong opposition from residents of Muan-gun County, largely over concerns about noise and compensation.
방법이야 여러 가지가 있을 텐데 오늘 최종 결론이 나지는 않겠지만 그 해결책의 단초를 한번 찾아보면 어떨까 싶은 생각이.
The live televised event brought together the mayors and governors of the key stakeholders, Gwangju City, Jeollanam-do province, and Muan-gun County, each presenting their positions and offering possible compromises.
The airbase relocation should be a chance to elevate Muan International Airport into a gateway hub for the southwestern region. It would be great if the president gives an order to form a joint team, including Muan-gun County, Gwangju City, the Finance and Defense Ministries, to meet and reach a conclusion.
If the project is led by the central government and comes with groundbreaking incentives that outweigh the costs, I would have a basis to persuade our residents.
The president laid out his plan after hearing from both sides.
저는 이제 국가 단위에서 제가 책임을 지는 게 맞다고 생각해요. 그래서 정부에서 이걸 주관을 좀 하도록 하겠습니다. 그 대통령실에서 TF팀을 만들고요. 만들고 최대한 빨리 속도 있게 실제 조사도 좀 하고 이 주민들도 좀 참여시키든지 외부 전문가도 좀 하고 해가지고 TF팀을 만들도록 하시고요.
Before the town hall, President Lee visited the Sorokdo National Hospital for Hansen's disease patients, becoming the first South Korean president to do so. This was a promise made by First Lady Kim Hae-kyung, who had visited the island during the campaigning period. Song Yoo-jin, Arirang News.
The month of April recorded yet another tangible rise in the birth of babies here in South Korea. Our Shin Se-byul covers the latest findings.
South Korea recorded its sharpest April increase in birth in 34 years. Data from Statistics Korea released on Wednesday show that 20,717 babies were born in April 2025, up 8.7% from a year earlier, marking the highest year-on-year increase for April since 1991. With this, the number of newborns has seen on-month increases for 10 consecutive months since July last year. This pushed the total fertility rate to 0.79, up 0.06 points on year. It also marks 4 straight months of gains in the average number of children a woman is expected to have. Marriage figures also stayed on an upward trend. A total of 18,923 couples got married in April, up 4.9% from the previous year. This marks the 13th consecutive month of growth, as well as the steepest April rise in 6 years. Divorces, meanwhile, fell by 5.2% over the same period. One expert, however, cautioned that the recent uptick may be temporary, driven more by demographic timing than by any meaningful change in social or economic conditions.
There are 3 key factors behind the trend: delayed marriages and childbirths due to the pandemic, and a large cohort currently in their prime age for marriage and childbirth. But this doesn't signal a fundamental shift in social conditions.
To see lasting change, the expert stressed the need to address broader challenges, including housing, education, and job stability. Meanwhile, 28,785 deaths were reported in April, up 0.8% from a year earlier. As a result, the population shrank by 8,068, marking the 66th consecutive month of natural decline. 신세벽, Arirang News.
On the defense front, South Korea has successfully conducted a safety separation flight test of its homegrown long-range air-to-surface guided missile. According to the state-run procurement agency, the test was conducted on Monday and comes as part of its plan to develop missiles for the KF-21 fighter jets for precision strikes on enemy targets. Now, more tests are scheduled to be carried out in the future before simulations involving a KF-21 prototype starting in the year 2027. In other news, Korea's mandatory military service break is no longer considered a career setback for K-pop idols. Our Park Kwon-woo tells us why.
Welcome back. Fans say it with sincerity after a long wait for their favorite K-pop idols to finish their military service. Those two words have never felt more powerful than this June, the month when BTS finally became whole again, with Suga being the last member to officially complete his military duty.
The military service is very demanding, so they need to take a little break, but we're most looking forward to, their comeback, their new potential concepts, their new music. We're just happy that they're back together.
Yeah, exactly.
Fans from around the world have been preparing for this moment, some even from the year before. On this day, it was easy to find global fans from regions, including Southeast Asia and North and South America, celebrating the return of their favorite stars. That was especially visible at fan cafes, where fans transform regular cafes into customized spaces for special events like being discharged from the military.
At first glance, this may look like an ordinary cafe, but take a closer look, and you'll find all kinds of decorations celebrating the discharge of BTS members from the military. From photo displays, to fan letters, and even custom-made merchandise. There was a time when military service meant 2 years of silence with less interaction with fans, but now fans have found ways to stay connected.
Fans say they managed to wait, thanks ironically to the abundance of content released when the artists were away.
They were prepared before they went into the military. At least they had some content for all of the army to consume while they were away. So I'm sure they really thought of us.
One expert says the military service break used to be seen as a major obstacle to idol careers, but not anymore.
Unlike now, in the past, idol groups typically lasted only a few years, and very few made it past 7. That meant going to the military during their peak often ended their career in fandom. But K-pop's global expansion is also another factor, as international fans tend to stay loyal, regardless of age, giving artists greater longevity.
He added that in the case of BTS, the group's decision to enlist one by one was a smart strategy, helping maintain the group's brand even while some members were away. As public perception toward military service breaks has shifted, the time away is no longer seen as a full stop, but merely a comma before a brand new chapter begins. Park Kwon-woo, Arirang News.
This is The World Now, bringing you the latest stories from around the globe. A Russian missile strike on Ukraine's Dnipropetrovsk region has killed at least 26 civilians and injured hundreds in one of the most devastating attacks this week. On Tuesday around midday local time, a Russian ballistic missile attack hit the city of Dnipro and surrounding areas, including the town of Samar. The strike struck a passenger train, schools, kindergartens, a hospital, and other civilian infrastructure. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky, attending the NATO Summit in The Hague, condemned the attack as a message of terror and rejection of peace. He urged Western allies to impose tougher sanctions on Russia and supply additional military aid to Ukraine. Russian drones and missiles have struck multiple regions this week, leaving a high civilian toll across Ukraine. In Greece, a state of emergency remains in effect on the island of Chios, where wildfires have been burning for the past 3 days. Hundreds of firefighters have been deployed to contain the blazes before they reach villages and vital farmland. More than 400 firefighters, supported by 14 helicopters, 2 water-dropping planes, and more than 80 vehicles are fighting multiple fire fronts as strong winds fan the blazes. Forests, olive groves, and some farmland, including areas known for producing Chios's famous mastia resin, have been devastated. Authorities have evacuated hundreds of residents from more than 20 villages. Greece's Minister for Climate Crisis and Civil Protection confirmed that investigators are looking into the possibility of arson after simultaneous outbreaks in unconnected locations. Eastern parts of the United States are experiencing an intense heat dome effect, characterized by oppressive heat and high humidity across New York and its surrounding area. On Tuesday, New York City reached 38 degrees Celsius at JFK Airport for the first time since 2013, as extreme heat warnings covered the entire metropolitan area through 8 p.m., when it was downgraded to heat advisories through Wednesday evening. Experts predict that the heat dome will persist through midweek. Residents have been advised to stay hydrated and limit outdoor exposure during the late morning and afternoon hours. Choi Ji-hee, Arirang News.
Rain has been continuing on and off in most parts of the country today. The rain will mostly stop tonight, but some parts of Gangwon-do province and Chungcheongbuk-do province will have rain until tomorrow morning. As for the amount of rainfall, about 5 to 20 millimeters of rain is expected in Gyeonggi-do province, Gangwon-do province, northern parts of Chungcheongbuk-do province and Gyeongsang-buk-do province, and around 5 to 10 millimeters in other parts of the country, including Seoul. Tomorrow and Friday, as the monsoon rain takes a break, daytime temperatures will rise back to around 30 degrees Celsius, mainly in inland areas. Tomorrow morning will stay warm at around 19 to 22 degrees all over the country. Highs will move up to 28 degrees in Seoul, 27 degrees in Daejeon and Busan. More rain will begin in the Seoul metropolitan area and Chungcheongnam-do province on Friday and spread nationwide on Saturday. That's all for Korea. Here are the weather conditions around the world.
Those are the headlines at this hour here in South Korea. As always, thank you for watching.
Building a sustainable tomorrow. Connect, innovate, and prosper. Connecting goods to goods, region to region, people to people, generation to generation. Facilitating innovation for all, closing the digital divide. Building an inclusive technology ecosystem, promoting digital innovation by deepening dialogues on AI. Achieving shared prosperity, addressing global challenges. Energy transition, climate change, population decline, and pandemic responses. APEC-related events continuing in Seoul, the capital of the Republic of Korea, where diverse cultures blend. Jeju, the beautiful island, blessed with UNESCO Natural World Heritage Sites. Incheon, the vibrant international city, central hub, connecting Asia Pacific. Busan, the largest maritime city, centering around maritime trade and the logistics industry. And Kangju, the city, hosting the APEC Economic Leaders Meeting, where 2,000 years of profound history and modern, trendy, and youthful energy blend in a perfect balance. Here, a new chapter of economic exchanges will unfold for a better future.
걱정마저 혹시 네가 걱정하고 있을까 봐 두려움에 떨고 있어 애써 숨기려고 하고 싶진 않아 오늘도 이 밤을 넘기기를 런던은 지금쯤 뭘 하고 있니 바다 같은 나뭇잎은 춤추고 우린 그걸 따라 했어 그게 초록맘이었지 아무 말도 하지 않은 오늘 울음으로 낮췄어 했던 거라 너는 아직 과거에 있어 그게 무슨 소용이던가 한 후배 곁에 떠먹었던 사랑을 했어 너 그래 우리 모두 가요 I got the wizard Hey you know what we've got
"75 years ago today, that is June 25th, South Korea was invaded by North Korea, and this invasion led to a war that lasted 3 years. On Press Perspective today, we touch upon this past confrontation and our present challenges on the Korean Peninsula. Hello, you're watching Press Perspective for this Wednesday, June 25th here in Seoul. I'm Min Sun-hee. Today we mark a solemn anniversary that is the start of the outbreak of the Korean War back in 1950. Now, that being said, in this session of our panel discussion with our foreign journalists, we shed light on the cross-border ties. For more on this, I have Thomas Moresco with American news agency UPI here in the studio. Thomas, welcome.
Thanks, great to be here.
I also have Fabian Kretschmer with the German news agency DPA. Fabian, welcome.
Great to be in the studio here.
Right, Thomas, a journalist named Jack James, who worked for your agency, was the first foreign journalist to cover North Korea's incursion of South Korea in the wee hours of June 25th, 1950. Could you tell us a bit about this journalist?
Yes, so as you mentioned, he was the first one to break the story, even before Washington officials had confirmed it. So he was the manager of the Seoul, and then it was UP, United Press Bureau. And as the story goes, I guess he was planning to just go on a picnic that day. and thought it was going to rain. Went to the U.S. Embassy to pick up a raincoat. I guess he had left a raincoat there. And it was there that he met an Army intelligence officer who asked him about what he had heard about the border, and that's when he first got the information that something was going on across the border. And so he learned that North Korean Army units had crossed the 38th parallel, and then he apparently sent one of the Korean staff member up to the border to verify, and someone named George Su. Su came back, provided eyewitness reports, and then he filed it, and it came out on that Sunday. It was the only story to come out in the Sunday editions in Washington. And apparently, Washington phoned the Seoul embassy to confirm if the reports were true, which they were. I actually looked up the story. I mean, these are the first couple of lines. It says, troops from communist-dominated North Korea launched a series of attacks across the border into American-backed South Korea early Sunday, fragmentary reports from the frontier said. Mentioned that North Koreans were supported by tanks in the Chuncheon area. And that was it. Apparently the scoop also, he got a $50 raise for the scoop. And, he became one of the better known journalists at that time. He was actually transferred, though, the next year to Hong Kong to cover China at that point. And then in 1954, he got out of journalism and joined the Asia Foundation, like a US-based think tank and public sector, sort of private public sector group, where he spent 27 years, died in 2000. And there's actually an exhibition about him at the National Museum of Korean Contemporary History here in Seoul going on right now.
All right. Fabian, keeping in mind the contributions of Jack James and, of course, sharing the story of the situation in South Korea back in 1950, beyond sharing just facts, what do you suppose is the broader job of a journalist covering a war zone?
I think that's really an interesting question, because there are many misunderstandings what the actual role of a war correspondent is, and the role has also changed over the years. I mean, when I hear what the UPI correspondent achieved, I mean, that's amazing. And at that time, pre-internet, pre-smartphone, of course, it was very amazing what, just by documenting the facts, what you can achieve, because the world basically knew about this war through the eyes of Jack James. And nowadays, I think we have more an information overload. So I think now doses. So we basically need to know more about context. I think documenting the facts is not enough by itself. You have basically armies who have social media accounts. You have witnesses who post a lot of videos on their smartphones from every attack. So the role of the journalist is to collect all this information, give context, also analyze why conflicts are starting and happening and how they can be solved, and also fact-checking videos. So I think it's quite a different role. And the biggest command that actually has not changed over the years is to stay neutral. And that is actually a big task, because for some wars, for some conflicts, you have to be embedded with one side. For example, as part of the war in Iraq, many were embedded within the US military side. And then, of course, you only get to see what the US military wants you to see. And you always have to stay very transparent, have to stay neutral and try to keep some distance. And just one more example, Gaza. That's, for example, also a very difficult conflict to cover, because international journalists are not allowed inside Gaza, so they cannot even get access. So it's really a very challenging role, and the job as a war correspondent is not only dangerous, but also requires a lot of skills.
Right, it's a tough job, to say the least. Thomas, back here in South Korea, a recent survey by the Unification Ministry shows 4 out of 10 South Korean school students that is, believe unification with North Korea is not necessary. And apparently this ratio in itself has been rising steadily in recent years. How do you explain this phenomenon?
Right. Well, as you mentioned, so this poll came out from the Unification Ministry in April. It's an annual poll, and they polled 75,000 elementary, middle, and high school students. And so 42.3% said unification was not required, and that was up from 31.7% just 2 years before. Also just overall, more than 63% said they view North Korea as an adversary that warrants either caution or animosity, and negative perception was higher than positive perception by something like 30%. And the main reasons that the students gave in their responses were concern about social problems, something like social integration of North Koreans, and economic burden. Those were the top two, and that's a concern we've definitely heard and seen growing for quite a while among younger Koreans that are worried about their own economic futures, and then the idea of what it would take to integrate, North Korea into the country's. North Korea's GDP in 2023 was around 23 billion, while South Korea's was 1.73 trillion. There's this massive gap, and I think socially too, just the idea, the longer the countries have been separated, it seems that the greater the gap has grown, obviously, in wealth, but just in kind of social, society and culture and awareness of the world. And I think the idea of integrating North Koreans into the South seems such a daunting or impossible task, and such an expensive task as well. I mean, maybe not even that long ago. I think even during the Park Geun-hye administration, there was this idea of, North Korea could be this economic, benefit. We'd get all of these lower cost, workers entering the workforce, and that could be helpful and help the demographic crisis we're facing. But I think that idea is sort of passing by, and the idea that the skills gap would just be so large. And, the ministry also said in their analysis that, also that just the public perception has been weakening because of North Korean provocations and inter-Korean relations being severed, and that's been going on over these past several years. When you think about younger kids now, they probably don't even remember the last period of détente, like in 2017 or 2018. And so, the hostility has grown so much over the past few years. So there's, this sense of just seeing North Korea as an enemy, and I think when you look at older generations, there was a more direct connection with, people literally were sisters and brothers, had been, were separated during the war. There was, like a real life memory of people that were North Koreans. Now that time has gone, just has passed so long that there's not the same sense of kinship or oneness. And I think also, there used to be this idea of, it still exists, of kind of a Korean ethnic, identity. It's called minjok, I guess, and I think that also among younger generations has really been sort of diminishing in the sense. So there's not really the same idea as strongly, I think, in previous generations as we're all one people because we're Korean somehow. So those are some of the reasons. At the same time, I also think there is a sense of this is kind of an abstraction. I do wonder sometimes if this were actually going to happen for some reason, either a hard landing or soft landing, where we had the sense that we needed to integrate. I do think maybe younger generation might be more open to it or more curious about it, and maybe that's something, Fabian, you might have a perspective from how Germany reacted. It was a different situation. So, I do think in some sense it just feels perhaps like a far off possibility, but that's where the attitudes stand these days.
Right then, Fabian, as Thomas has just mentioned, when South Koreans do talk about the prospects of unification here on the Korean Peninsula, they often refer to or mention the unification between East and West Germany. What does history tell us about the sentiments of the Germans just before their reunification?
Actually, when I looked it up, I was quite surprised by myself, because now almost no German would actually question or doubt that the unification at that time in 1990 was the correct decision. There's really consensus that unification was correct. It was a good thing. It was a historic chance. But at that time, basically, it was very controversially debated. The movement within East Germany, in the socialist state, the people who demonstrated and brought the regime down, they wanted to live in a more freer society, in a more economically prosperous society. They wanted to have more political participation. But whether they would be unified with West Germany, that was actually not the main agenda for them. Equally in West Germany, among all political spectrums, from the conservatives to the social democrats, the more leftist people, it was basically 50-50. Some said yes, unification would be good, would be beneficial. Others were worried about economic costs, or some said no, I think it's not a problem to coexist between and have two states. And I wasn't really aware about that, and maybe the lesson that can be drawn for Korea is that actually unification can be maybe, or whether it's good or bad, I mean, I think that is open for debate, but Germany was never as separated as long as Korea is now. The economic gap between the two countries in West and East Germany was also big, but definitely not as big as between South and North Korea. And the two countries were never really as isolated from each other as North and South Korea are today. I mean, you could always send some letters, you could have some exchange between also families in the West and East Germany. So yeah, basically it's a little bit a depressing lesson, because unification seems quite out of reach right now when you look at the situation in the Korean Peninsula.
Right. And as I mentioned in the clip, Thomas, today, Korea, the two Koreas that is, marks the start of the outbreak of the Korean War on the Korean Peninsula. President Lee Jae Myung shared a message on his social media platform today in light of the solemn anniversary. What did he say, Thomas?
Right, so I saw it on Facebook. I'm not sure if he shared it on other platforms, and it was quite brief. I mean, he really focused mostly on the idea of establishing peace on this anniversary of the war. You know, he wrote, and this is a translation, creating a country that will never experience war again is the right way to respond to the sacrifices and dedication of so many people. The most certain security is a state where there is no need to fight. You know, that is creating peace, sort of saying that the era of relying on military power is over. It's more important to win without fighting than win by fighting. So, you know, it echoes basically how he has framed what he wants the relationship with North Korea to be like under his administration. You know, he's talked often, I don't think he's over-promised, you know, sort of new détente, but he's definitely talked about creating the conditions for peace, bringing down sort of the temperature on the peninsula, and you know, so that was really the stance he took. He also paid respects to the fallen soldiers and veterans. He made a point about saying that South Korea's transformation into this global economic power that it is today wouldn't have been possible without their sacrifices. You know, he mentioned wanting to do more to help the veterans and their families, you know, support them. So that was, you know, generally it. He just said, you know, he pledged to firmly establish a peace regime on the Korean Peninsula, which is a phrase we've heard in the past. It felt like you know, not so much the previous administration, but maybe under the Moon Jae-in and the more sunshine-oriented administrations have used this kind of language, you know, a peace regime on the Korean Peninsula. So that's yeah, how he sent the message. It was not very long.
Right, and President Lee Jae Myung has also nominated Chung Dong-young to the post of Unification Minister. What can you tell us about Chung Dong-young and his potential approach to North Korea?
Well, I can tell you that he used to be a former colleague of ours. He started his career as a journalist, and he was pretty much a well-known news anchor also. He worked for one of the three big public broadcasters here in South Korea, nationwide broadcasters. And sorry, actually not public, private broadcaster. But yeah, he then in the mid-90s, 1990s, switched over to become a politician. At that time, he was still very young, and he already was unification minister pretty much 20 years ago under Roh Moo-hyun, under also a liberal president. And during that time, he had one big achievement. He was really a crucial figure in establishing the Kaesong industrial zone. And I need to explain that just at the border between South and North Korea, on the North Korean side, there was an industrial zone, an economic zone where South Korean factory owners, they established factories, and North Korean workers produced textile and other goods. And if you look at it now, it's kind of an amazing project, but it came to, operation came to a halt when the political relation between the two countries became sour. But yeah, he was basically crucial in establishing that project, and he basically received or made sure that the US gave support to that project. So I would say you can say he's, in terms of North Korea, one of the most veteran experts that the ruling party nowadays has. So I think it's quite a well-qualified figure, but right now the situation has changed. North Korea has changed. North Korea has dropped also the unification goal officially in their policy. So how should South Korea react? I think that's actually a tough question. And so I would say right now the focus is on establishing peace and not so much unification. So yeah, it's really a tough job that Mr. Jyang is facing.
Right. Thomas, as Fabienne just mentioned, North Korea's Kim Jong-un ruled out prospects of unification with South Korea during the former South Korean administration. But do you envision perhaps a shift in the sense of animosity on the Korean peninsula now that we have a new South Korean administration in power?
Well, I think right now it's hard to see really any strong indications. You know, you can look for these little things, maybe these little temperature going down moments. You know, Lee Jae Myung ordered the suspension of the propaganda loudspeakers at the DMZ, and apparently North Korea responded by turning down their speakers that were blasting noise and weird sounds. You know, there are little things like that. I think a lot of it is just trying to interpret, are they saying, is North Korea saying more, saying less? You know, what is their tone like? But it's still so early. We haven't seen much response. You know, so, and it's hard. It's quite hard to imagine things going to a warm relationship. But I would also say, you know, in history, the pendulum has swung back and forth so many times that you also, you know, I would never say never. You know, there could be a sort of a bigger reversal. But, you know, when you compare now to the time of the last big détente period, this 2017, 2018, I mean, a lot has changed since then. And it may, you know, you can see it being a little bit harder perhaps to reestablish something, just because, you know, North Korea is so much farther along on its nuclear and its weapons programs. You know, you know, North Korea, if it did just say come back to a negotiating table, would be coming back from a much different position, a position of much more leverage. You know, there's also not the sense that maybe North Korea needs something quite as much, at least now with this relationship with Russia. They're getting, you know, some financial support, getting other, you know, and they're at least not as entirely isolated from the world as they have been at certain points, and as vulnerable to sanctions. But, you know, those situations could obviously change. I mean, it's not clear that that's a lasting relationship forever. You know, and obviously Lee Jae Myung has set out this goal to kind of lower the level of hostility, so that, you know, you could see at least less aggression and less back and forth than we have been used to. But, you know, it still is hard to picture a reversal of some sort from the position that Kim Jong-un staked out. And there's also this Trump factor, you know, this idea that, you know, Donald Trump may want to swoop back in and restart his negotiations with Kim Jong-un, and that could be something that could push the process along. You know, at the same time, I mean, that could happen, and I'm sure Lee Jae Myung would be supportive of that to some extent. But, you know, at the same time, looking at just, say, what happened with Iran, you know, there's a lot of, I think North Korea probably now is thinking, you know, this is more reason for us to keep our nuclear arsenal, and, you know, not sure whether they would trust Trump to live up to any deals that were made. So that's, yeah, I think that's where things stand.
Right. Keeping in mind what Thomas has said, Fabienne, do you suppose that civic engagement here in South Korea can perhaps serve to ease tensions on the Korean peninsula?
Well, ideally, there would be civic engagement between the two Koreas, but of course that's impossible because North Korea is preventing that. And yeah, I think that is important, that you need to engage citizens, that you also need to have an open debate, actually free from ideology, whether how a future North Korea policy could look like, whether unification should be a goal or not. I have the feeling that no matter, or depending on which political camp you belong to, you emphasize the threat by North Korea, others have a more rosy view. But I would wish that for North Korea, and especially in the question of unification, yes or no, you need to have realistic debates. For example, what could be possible steps? Could a model of federation work? And is it a decade-long process, or could unification happen overnight? What would you do with the North Korean elites? How would you try to integrate them into South Korea? I mean, those are all very difficult questions. And then the economic cost question. I mean, there are many reasons for having economic benefits when Korea becomes a bigger country. But on the other hand, at least for a long period of time, North Korea, or integrating North Korea, would be a economic burden. So those questions need to be discussed. And I think, this debate is not really happening right now, but I think in the future it would really make sense if we have more questions debated like this.
Right, as a pundit I know once said, there's so many questions and so few answers.
Right.
All right, Fabienne, thank you so much for your time and your thoughts. And Thomas, as always, thank you very much for your insights.
Thank you.
Right, well, that ends Press Perspective for today. Thank you, as always, for watching.